miles away from any town deep in the Alaskan wilderness, is an abandoned structure that is slowly being swallowed by nature. This is Fort McGilvery, and during World War II, this was a strategic location during what many say is the Forgotten War. This is when the Japanese invaded a set of islands just off the coast of Alaska as their first step to make their way to the mainland United States.
Got it? How incredible is this? This is Resurrection Bay. I just flew up to Alaska to meet up with my buddy Jake Sloan, who's a local up here, and we're headed out to Fort McGilvery. And this was an important defensive position during World War II, and unknown to a lot of people, the battles that took place up here actually had a major impact on the outcome of the war.
The bombing of Pearl Harbor brought us into World War II, but there was actually another attack on US soil that happened here in Alaska 6 months later. Out in the Aleutian Islands is where the forgotten battles were fought, and it's here where the Japanese attacked Dutch Harbor as a stepping stone to get towards the US mainland. And however small these battles were in the Aleutian Islands compared to the rest of the war, this campaign became instrumental to an Allied victory in the Pacific.
So I haven't really been kayaking in a while. Last time was probably about 3 years ago. I was in Portugal doing some sea kayaking, so a little tippy, but getting used to it. These views are insane. I mean, look at all these snow-capped mountains around us. It's the middle of summer, and where we're headed is, you can see straight out there, point at which where this base was built.
To get to Fort McGilvery, we have a 5-mile kayak across the bay, and then from there, it's roughly a 4-mile hike to get to the base.
Now, we're not in the Aleutian Islands. Those are out tail end of Alaska, and they extend all the way to the east, Asia. But the battles that took place out on those islands is what prompted building the base that we're heading out to right now.
In 1942, the Japanese launched a 2-day attack on Dutch Harbor. This attack was an attempt to establish a foothold in the northern Pacific, and from here, the Japanese could advance either towards Alaskan mainland or move towards the northwestern states in the US. And a few days after this attack, the Japanese took the islands of Kishka and Attu, which were the most western Aleutian Islands. Now, there wasn't just military bases here on these islands. The Aleut people have lived in this region for thousands of years. But after invading Attu, the Japanese forces took the native islanders to Japan as prisoners. And so with the supposed goal of protecting the Aleut people, the American military forced nearly 900 villagers to move from their homes in the Aleutian Islands to southeast Alaska. And the Allied military burned their villages to prevent the Japanese from finding any resources that might aid in their advances. So essentially they cleared these islands to make it a battleground.
Fort McGilvery is definitely out in the middle of nowhere. We just kayaked 5 miles across Resurrection Bay to Cape Canes, which is where the base sits. And this was actually a very strategic location because at the end of Resurrection Bay was the town of Seward, which was the terminus of the Alaskan Railroad, which if that got cut off and taken by enemy forces, well, all military and civilian supplies would have been cut off for the entire region. So we landed at what's called Derby Cove, and that actually wasn't where we intended to land. We were trying to get to North Beach, which is where the main dock was for this whole military base. But the waves were getting pretty rough out there, so we decided to stop here, and we're gonna hike up and over, get to North Beach, and that's where we'll start seeing the remnants of this military base. This was the spot where boats would come in for the base. You can see the old pier over there. We're not super far from Seward. However, no roads were built between Seward and the military base. So everything had to be brought in by boat and came to this beach. From this beach here, there was 5 miles of road built all through this area. So this location was chosen for a few reasons. One is that we're on a cape that sticks out into Resurrection Bay. And this allowed it to be a perfect vantage point to see oncoming enemies that were coming in to attack Seward. But the second reason was that this area stays ice-free in the winter. Alaska has harsh winters, and having a port that stayed ice-free made it so that it was strategically important for this entire region during the war. So this path that we're hiking, this was the old road that goes from North Beach all the way to the base. How cool is this? This is the old ammo storage. It was just built into the rock. Amazing how nature is just taking over though. From back here, you can't even see what this is. Come back around to the front, there it is. And look at this door, just steel and concrete. If this was anywhere else, this would be graffitied, just destroyed, but we're so far out here.
I've been coming out here since pretty much the first year we moved to Alaska, which was in 1996. And back in the 90s when I came out here, most of these spruce trees were around, but they were a lot smaller. They were maybe like 12 feet high, but almost none of this brush was around. Because this was used to spot potential incoming attack, you could see all the way out over the ocean. And now you really can't see very far at all, just because the brush has overgrown so much in the last 20 or 30 years.
I can see why this was such a strategic point for the military, because from here, if there was no trees, you could see everyone that would be coming into this bay. You just have such a good view of everything that could be headed towards Seward. So this was one of the old gun turrets. Look how big this is. They used to have a massive gun mounted here. You had a perfect view. Now there's two of these here on the base, one here and one on the other side. And they were placed in a way where they could see out two different directions over the bay. Now, Fort McGilvery wasn't here long. By March of 1944, the military ordered this base to be dismantled. These guns that were on either side of the base were shipped off to South Dakota and San Diego, and this entire base was just abandoned. So this is the fort's main battery. When you go through here and you pop out on either side, that's where the 6-inch guns are. So the Japanese held the islands of Kishka and Attu, but on May 11th of 1943, the US and Canadian military landed on the island of Attu to take it back. But it wasn't an easy battle. The Japanese dug themselves in and put up a strong fight. The US suffered over 3,000 casualties, but eventually the Japanese were overrun. And in a last-ditch effort, the Japanese accepted the fact that they were all gonna die, and they all charged into battle. So you can imagine how intense that fighting was. So in the end, the Allies retook the islands and forced the Japanese back. And the only route to the continental US was secure once again. So this base was no longer needed. Now with the victory out on the Aleutian Islands, the Americans were able to capture a plane that the Japanese used heavily during the war called a Zero. It was a single-seat, low-wing monoplane that was used heavily during the war. And American technicians were able to reverse engineer the plane and be able to find all of its weak points and vulnerabilities. And this information became essential later on in the war. Now, while all this was going on, the Aleut people stayed in makeshift camps in southeast Alaska. And when the campaign was over, they were able to return home. But unfortunately, some of the islands remained off limits indefinitely. This is one of the most well-preserved, abandoned places that I've been able to explore. And it was a pretty incredible feat of engineering. often these places just get destroyed from people coming and graffiti and garbage and partying. But this one, because it's in such a remote location, it's basically just being taken apart by nature itself. And the structures that are surviving will be here for a long time. Exploring Fort McGilvery allows us to get a sense of what it was like being here during World War II and seeing what the soldiers saw from this location. And this story also shows us how much impact war has on a region, even when it is somewhere super remote.